Yeah, very important story to get out there for the public. We're following two murders in recent months. Of course, the more well-known one, unfortunately, Irina Zarutska in Charlotte, who was allegedly murdered by DeCarlos Brown Jr. on the light rail while she was coming home from work. She was allegedly stabbed in the neck and on August 22nd. So we've got that murder. We also have a murder in Raleigh that maybe is a little less well known in the Charlotte area, but is becoming more well known, and I'm assuming will be across the state. It's a 57-year-old Zoe Welsh in Raleigh. She was a teacher at the school, Ravenscroft School. It's a private school in Raleigh, by another person who had a long rap sheet. We'll get into that. Unfortunately, they released the 911 or they released the 911 transcript on Friday, to say how she, called 911 and said the person who broke into her house had a brick and was beating her with a brick. So both stories are similar. There are some major differences. We'll go through those, but they both shine a spotlight on what is wrong with possibly the mental health system, the bail system, the criminal justice system right now. There's just so many things we can go down different roads with this, but it is shining a spotlight on this important story.
And obviously we cover news here across the state of North Carolina, but Teresa, I mean, you could close your eyes and you can see similar stories taking place almost in every other state throughout the nation. It's created even a big divide at the national political level, pitting Republicans against Democrats over what is constantly described as soft on crime policies. Bail reform you see as a major champion in blue cities and states all across the nation. This has prompted lawmakers here in Raleigh. We tracked this in the latter parts of 2025, Teresa. They've come back to Raleigh. They've worked through legislation to try and strengthen some of these bail policies across the state of North Carolina. Hopefully that, at least in the short term, has some immediate impact, again, on dangerous, hardened criminals being released back out into the public, unfortunately, where it ends many of the time with innocent individuals being slain.
Right. And going back to Irina Zarutska, we now have Irina's law that was passed by the General Assembly, signed into law by Governor Josh Stein. But preceding that, we even had a U.S. House Judiciary Committee hearing that was held in Charlotte on the victims of violent crime. That was back in September. Lawmakers, they clashed over the causes of rising violent crime. As you mentioned, Republicans blasted lenient bail and repeat offenders, while Democrats pressed for more funding for mental health care and local prosecutors, specifically for Mecklenburg County. But I talked to representatives in the House on both sides of the aisle. Both issues really are at play when we get down to that. Definitely want to strengthen that. But there is a committee hearing coming up on Wednesday that's coming up in the House Select Committee hearing. It's the House Select Committee on Involuntary Commitment and Public Safety. They're meeting at 9:30 in the morning in Raleigh to discuss those issues. So hopefully we'll get some more solutions out of that meeting.
No question about that. Obviously, this is in large part, not 100%, but in large part, Teresa, pretty split evenly amongst party lines. You've got Republicans pretty squarely on one side of the issue, Democrats on the other. You mentioned, and you've got some quotes in your story over at CarolinaJournal.com as you spoke to members from both political parties. Walk us through some of those conversations and what lawmakers had to say when you were asking some of these very important questions across the state.
Sure. So leading off in the story, we did talk to Governor Josh Stein after the council state meeting last week. I'm asking him specifically what he thought about magistrates or judges maybe not thoroughly evaluating people when it comes to those who commit such crimes. And he said really the system isn't doing a good enough job in treating those with mental health issues with such violent behaviors. He said more needs to be done. Jail is not the right place. The people really do need to be treated. Also, I did talk to via email to Representative Marcia Morey. She is a Democrat out of Durham, Durham County, and she served in the past as a district court judge in the 14th Judicial District for 18 years and also chief district court judge for 5 years before she was appointed to the General Assembly. She said hundreds of thousands of bonds are ordered each year, and she's seen bonds really high for violent offenders and murder charges, and a person might be held without the benefit of posting any bond. But she said there is always room for improvement in the system, but that should not be overshadowed by political divisiveness. What can be done is an examination of local bond policies, ensuring all judges and magistrates are properly trained and have access to prior criminal histories, which I found very notable of her to say. Going on the other side, we also talked to Representative Mike Schiechel from Wake County. He is a Republican in the House. He's an attorney and a Marine Corps veteran. He said it's a complex issue. There are complex issues for both. He says, now, Irina's law, which took effect on December 1st, that deals with restricting pre-trial release and cashless bail. On the other hand, it's Ryan Camacho, who is the alleged murderer for Zoe Welsh in Raleigh. He said that case is a little different because it's talking about the standard for competence to stand trial and the standard for involuntary commitment. Right now, he said, we have to take a look if there actually are the resources, if there's enough beds. They've closed psychiatric hospitals over the years. So are there enough beds? Are there enough staff? He said the judicial system, the criminal justice system is very overwhelmed at this point, ranging from everybody from, prosecutors to public defenders. He said it is a very, very complex situation. And he and Representative Aaron Perret out of Wake County actually sent a letter to that committee, the House Select Committee. It's meeting on Wednesday, for them to take a look into these issues as well. And he has heard from people from this Ryan Camacho, and there's been many, many news reports in the Raleigh area that this Zoe Welsh, unfortunately, is not the only person he quote unquote terrorized. He's been going after numerous people, vandalizing their property, their cars, just really, terrorizing them. So if there are any people out there who have similar situations, maybe not just with Ryan Camacho, but with anybody, contact your local officials, your local legislators, and let them know about this. They want to hear this. They want to hear about this problem. And like he said, it's not going to be solved overnight, but they want to get a better handle on this to really, quell this issue, get things under control.
One of the things that both political parties seem to have in common is that, yes, in fact, it is a complicated political issue and a complicated judicial issue, a complicated monetary issue. There's a lot of different pieces that go into this. As you mentioned, Teresa, one of the big things in Irina's law, which was passed during the long session in 2025 by the North Carolina General Assembly, was holding some of these magistrates accountable for their decisions to release criminals. As you heard from the Democrat representative out of Durham County, they now have to look at the entire track record of somebody's criminal background and make a serious determination as to whether that person should be released or not. And if they choose to release somebody not looking at all of that information, they could be potentially losing their jobs. As I understand, the statute is now written and in law here in North Carolina. So there is some additional consequences for those in those positions as magistrates to make sure that they are truly digging into all the pertinent and relevant information.
Right. That is correct. That is in that statute. And that is very important. The one who was Teresa Stokes, the magistrate who, had DeCarlos Brown Jr. sign a written promise after she, let him go was in January 2025. He was misusing 911. People were questioning her qualifications and also, her judgment in that case. As far as the Zoe Welsh case, we had a Wake County District Attorney tried to have Camacho involuntarily committed for a crime he did in August, but Wake County District Judge Lewis Meyer III denied that request, and the charges in the case were dismissed, leaving Camacho to walk free. So maybe more scrutiny over that as well. But yeah, you're correct. That is in that legislation.
And Teresa, what you just mentioned there with the situation out of Wake County it's got to be so frustrating and disheartening. Obviously, a terrible loss of life we're not trying to politicize that in any way, shape, or form, but you had the legal system trying to do what it could, seeking that involuntary commitment. It was thrown out by a judge, and now you've got a situation where you have a dead Raleigh school teacher. And I think many would say, had that involuntarily commitment gone forward, we would not be talking about this story at all this morning, Teresa.
Correct. And, go through the story, his mother tried to have him, I believe, committed, she had some guardianship over him. I mean, like I said, he's been arrested more than 20 times for crimes involving shooting into an occupied property, found guilty of escaping prison in Salisbury. The list went on and on and on. And then when you had this situation, letting him walk free, finally someone's murdered and the detention is now there. Well, maybe something could have been done to prevent this from happening. In fact, one of the victims of Camacho from before the terrorizing, he said in a news report, this did not have to happen. She should not have been murdered. So there's just, at what point, I think probably legislators are now trying to prevent more murders from happening. And it's unfortunate in this situation that this happened to Zoe Welsh, who was a beloved school teacher, science teacher in the Ravenscroft School in Raleigh.
Yeah, and it's also unfortunate, Teresa, that we often hear that same quote after these horrific atrocities take place. This could have or should have been avoided. Teresa, you've got a lot of additional details on this morning, walking through the cases in both Raleigh and Charlotte. You've also got some additional quotes from lawmakers as well. Where can folks go and get those details this morning?
Sure, they can head on over to carolinajournal.com.
We appreciate the information this morning. Teresa Opeka joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:18 on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT. We'll head to the traffic center on an early Tuesday morning commute. Get a look at the roadways with Dave Hewitt.
And the key word there is early. There are rewards.
It's 525. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT. Last week, we talked about how hundreds of North Carolina public school teachers called out of work. That was on January the 7th, participating in a protest organized by a group called NC Teachers in Action. The group of that, the reason for that call out, I should say, was to push for more school funding and higher teacher pay and benefits, as organizers estimated between 650 and 750 teachers participated in that statewide action. And there are more of these organized call-outs, these organized protests to come in a couple of weeks. We'll have the details on that in just a second. North Carolina Teachers in Action has outlined several demands driving the continued protests across North Carolina, including restoring longevity pay, eliminating the 15 to 24-year pay freeze, enabling automatic pay raises, bringing back pay for master's degree holders, reinstating retiree health benefits, capping premium increases for existing teachers, and fully funding the Leandro Plan. Dr. Bob Lubke, who is the director of the Center for Effective Education at the John Locke Foundation, said teacher walkouts are work slowdowns, which are by definition a strike prohibited by North Carolina law. Still, I do sympathize with teachers. Having no budget in place, teachers and school districts are in a very difficult position. The blame for that is on lawmakers. Passing a budget is one of their duties, and they haven't approved one. If lawmakers would do their jobs, teachers stick to doing theirs or not having this conversation. Lawmakers have yet to pass a budget for the new biennium. We've talked about this, I don't even know how many times over the last 8 months or so, instead operating under previous budgets and using what are called mini budgets to cover immediate needs that may arise across North Carolina. In an opinion column for CarolinaJournal.com, Jeanette Doran, who is the chair in constitutional studies and senior counsel at the John Locke Foundation, pointed out that state law explicitly prohibits strikes by public employees, classifying coordinated teacher call-outs as unlawful work stoppages rather than protected free speech, despite claims that the demands are directed at the North Carolina General Assembly. Doran recently wrote in the column, encouraging or normalizing conduct that violates existing law is neither principled advocacy nor sound public policy. It undermines legal orders and places students in the middle of disputes that should have been resolved through lawful channels. That January the 7th walkout, which again, as I noted, had between 650 and 750 teachers statewide. There are more to come, according to the group NC Teachers in Action, has another protest scheduled for February the 7th and March the 7th. Both of which are scheduled for Saturdays, however, to minimize disruption to school instruction, unlike the one that we saw just over 1 week ago. We've got additional coverage of that this morning over on our website, CarolinaJournal.com, as Governor Stein also weighed into the issue during the January the 6th Council of State meeting, saying, quote, "The General Assembly has to step up for public education. We have a lot of things going really well for us in North Carolina. The best year ever in job announcements in 2025, 35,000 new good-paying jobs. We're the number one state for business. We just learned yesterday we're the number one state for workforce development, and we want to be the number one state for education. We can do better, and the General Assembly needs to do better as well." You can read some additional details on this, plus check out the opinion piece from Jeanette Doran, who is the senior counsel over at the John Locke Foundation. All of those details over on our website this morning, CarolinaJournal.com. That story's headline, hundreds of NC public school teachers call out from work in protest. It's now 5:29 on the Carolina Journal News Hour, Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 WBT. We'll head back to the traffic center, get another look at the roadways on your Tuesday morning commute with Dave Hewitt.
Hey, good morning. Yeah, we're in really good shape.
It's 5:37. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. We have an update this morning on one of the many legal challenges we continue to track here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Duke Energy, the state's largest electrical producer and provider, was seeking some relief from the United States Supreme Court. Questions over antitrust. To walk us through some of the latest on that this morning, Mitch Kokai with the John Locke Foundation joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Mitch, we chatted about this back in the month of November. Pretty substantial legal case potentially going forward for Duke Energy and municipalities and even customers across the state of North Carolina. What's the latest that we're learning from the nation's high court?
Well, the short version is the U.S. Supreme Court is not going to step in. So Duke Energy had asked the U.S. Supreme Court to take this case, and the Supreme Court has decided no, it's not going to step in. So here's a little bit of the background. Duke Energy, as you mentioned, is the major energy provider in North Carolina, has a monopoly on a lot of services. But there has been some competition. Outside providers have stepped in and wanted to get involved in North Carolina. And because of the way things are set up, Duke has to provide access to its transmission lines for these providers. And so an outside Florida-based company called NTE wanted to get involved in North Carolina and has built a power plant that operates, as all court records suggest, more efficiently than Duke's plans. And so NTE was starting to win some customers from Duke. And this was all well and good until NTE was looking at taking the contract from the city of Fayetteville, which is a major long-term anchor customer for Duke Energy. And so once Fayetteville's contract became up for grabs, what NTE alleges is that Duke was involved in anti-competitive behavior, illegal anti-competitive behavior, in order to keep that contract and to block NTE from getting that contract. NTE sued, a trial judge sided with Duke, but then the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals said, no, this is behavior that reading the complaint as true, which is what they need to do at the earliest stages in the litigation. This could be something that shows anti-competitive behavior, and so this case should be allowed to go forward. Duke Energy didn't like that ruling, went to the Supreme Court, asked for the Supreme Court to step in and say, no, this lawsuit can't go forward. Rather than making a decision early on, which is what the U.S. Supreme Court usually does, instead the Supreme Court asked the U.S. Solicitor General, which is the government lawyer who argues cases at the Supreme Court, asked the Solicitor General for input in this case. And in early December, the U.S. Solicitor General John Sauer came out with a brief that basically said, no, Duke is acting like a monopolist. There's no reason for you to take this case. There's plenty of reason to allow it to go forward and to have a jury deal with these issues. And the U.S. Supreme Court basically, without commenting one way or another about why it did this, decided that no, it's not going to take Duke's case. Based on what we saw, there is no dissent, that the justices agreed either unanimously, or if someone didn't agree, they didn't decide to write a dissent about it. But they all basically signed on to this notion that the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruling against Duke will be allowed to stand.
So, Mitch, does that mean that this case currently or will stay in the Fourth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals for the time being? I know that there was some previous court rulings in other jurisdictions with that. Where will this case stand right now that the High Court has said, no, we're not taking this up?
Well, now the case goes back to a trial judge, because what the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals had ruled was that the case should move forward back to a trial judge. What happens in the earliest stages of these cases is a lawsuit's filed. Typically, on the other side, there's a motion to dismiss for one reason or another. Sometimes they say you failed to state a claim that a court could deal with. Sometimes they say you lack standing. There are a number of reasons why a case could be dismissed. Duke Energy tried to have the case dismissed. The Fourth Circuit said, no, the case is not going to be dismissed. If it survives that stage, then you go back to the trial court for discovery where documents of witnesses are put together, there are depositions that are taken, and then you could actually have a trial or motion for a summary judgment, which would be a win for one side or the other without a trial. That's where the case goes now. Since the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't step in, the Fourth Circuit's ruling in the case is allowed to stand, and that means the case goes back to a trial court to deal with the allegations that NTE Carolina's made. Duke Energy was trying to avoid that happening. Duke was saying, look, there's no reason for this to even be allowed to go beyond the motion to dismiss stage. The Fourth Circuit said no. The Supreme Court decided not to take it. So it survives the motion to dismiss stage and now goes into the real heavy lifting of a lawsuit. And that is depositions and discovery and all of the other things that would go in, and potentially even a trial.
Mitch, I'm not going to ask you to try and pontificate on how this is going to play out. We could be many, many years from when this is all actually said and done. But in the immediate short term, the broader question and broader discussion over whether an energy producer and provider like Duke essentially has complete, almost monopolistic control over electricity services in the state of North Carolina, this could be something that is detrimental not only potentially to Duke, but other power companies throughout the rest of the United States, depending on how long this takes to go out, if it continues to shift around the court system. This is a major long-standing thing, and as you mentioned at the beginning, some of these other power utilities and companies are able to kind of ride on Duke's transmission system. Kind of brings you back to the old discussion of breaking up the AT&T system and the Bell system back in the day as well. We saw some of those similar discussions at that time before the Fed stepped in and said, hey, you can't do this anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of things that are worth noting at this point. One, because this is the Fourth Circuit and because the Supreme Court decided not to take this case, nothing that happens on this case would have any impact outside of the Fourth Circuit, which is the region that North Carolina is in, that also includes South Carolina and West Virginia and Maryland. So you would be limited in that respect. No other circuit would have to abide by anything that happens with the Fourth Circuit. Although if another dispute like this happens in another circuit, they might step in and say, here's what the Fourth Circuit said, and the Supreme Court declined to step in. And so there could be some sort of precedential value in other circuits, although not as much as outside of the Fourth Circuit. The other thing to note here that I think that is important is that one of Duke's arguments in trying to get this case dismissed was that all of the behavior that NTE Carolinas talked about, every action that was taken, was on its face legal, that everything that Duke did was legal. And the argument that NTE Carolinas was making was that all of these practices put together amounted to illegal anti-competitive behavior. And what Duke was arguing at both the Fourth Circuit and in its appeal to the Supreme Court was that's not an appropriate legal standard. If everything that Duke did was legal, then it's illegal. You can't say that all of this stuff is legal, but if you consider it all together, then it becomes illegal and anti-competitive. And basically, the Supreme Court declined to wade into that measure. They basically are allowing the Fourth Circuit to say that, well, if you do take all of these actions together, which might be legal, taken together, they could be illegal and anti-competitive. Duke was trying to get the Supreme Court to step in and say, no, that's an improper standard. There has to be activity that in and of itself is illegal for there to be any chance for a lawsuit. And the Supreme Court declined to step in, allowing the Fourth Circuit to bundle these various actions that Duke took together and saying together they could be anti-competitive and illegal.
As I mentioned, that it could potentially be years before we get to even maybe some of the next steps in this legal challenge. So not immediately clear when we'll have another update. However, we will keep you up to date with all of the latest. You can get those details over on our website, carolinajournal.com. We appreciate the update and the insight this morning. Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:46 on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT. Another check on the roadways on your Tuesday morning commute with Dave Hewitt.
Yeah, still in really good shape out there for it.
It's 5:53. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT, a great event coming to the state of North Carolina in the month of February. It's the John Locke Foundation's Carolina Liberty Conference. The event brings together policymakers, scholars, community leaders, and voters from across the state to explore the challenges and opportunities advancing freedom in today's political and cultural climate. The event will take place February 27th and 28th at the Starview Hotel in Raleigh. This year, alongside many of our special guests, we'll be celebrating the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. Some of the guest speakers include Chief Justice Paul Newby. Register for the 2026 Carolina Liberty Conference today at johnlocke.org. That's johnlocke.org. johnlocke.org. 5:54. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour as we continue with what is growing concern and frustration across the state of North Carolina. We have a phenomenal piece this morning over on our website, carolinajournal.com. The headline: Murderers fuel debate over bail mental health policies in North Carolina, as the state has seen, of course, one incredibly high-profile murder that took place in Charlotte in late August of 2025, that being the murder of 23-year-old Ukrainian refugee Irina Zarutska on the Charlotte Light Rail. Her alleged killer in that case, DeCarlos Brown Jr., has been charged at both the federal and state level. He had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and had been previously arrested 14 times, including multiple felonies prior to the attack August the 22nd on the Charlotte Light Rail. In January of 2025, he was arrested on a misdemeanor charge of misusing 911. However, he was released on bond by Magistrate Judge Teresa Stokes after he signed a written note promising to appear at his next court date, as many were left questioning the judgment made by Stokes at the time, as well as some of her qualifications for the position. We then now transition into a more recent story. On January the 3rd of this year, a school teacher in Raleigh, 57-year-old Zoe Walsh, who was a science teacher at Ravenscroft School in Raleigh, was allegedly murdered by 36-year-old Ryan Camacho. This was after she was found inside of her home severely beaten. According to 911 transcripts, Camacho broke into her home and was beating her over the head with a brick. She later died at the hospital from what police describe as life-threatening injuries. Similar situation. Camacho was charged with murder and felony burglary. However, he also has a lengthy rap sheet, having been arrested more than 20 times for crimes, including shooting into an occupied property. And in 2021, he was found guilty of escaping from prison in Salisbury, North Carolina. Many of the charges over the years, however, including a breaking and entering charge from August of 2025, were dropped against the 36-year-old in Raleigh. Many questions are continued to be raised as to what can be done, whether it's stronger legislation or holding local district attorneys and magistrates accountable. I encourage you to go check out the details on that piece this morning. Again, the headline over at carolinajournal.com: Murderers fuel debate over bail mental health policies in North Carolina. That's going to do it for a Tuesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back with you tomorrow morning, 5 to 6, right here on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT.